Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Matt Bailey, National Ambassador for the Scotch Malt Whisky Society. Good to see you. It's part 2 of flavour benchmarking, as we started with last night, which was a lot of fun. And I want to delve a bit more into that tonight. Part 2, if you like, of what that is and what that means and how we're going to make the most of that. So I really appreciate you tuning in tonight with me and having a chat about all things flavour benchmarking. On tonight's part 2, however, one of the things I was going to touch on tonight was vocabulary and flaws. Which is really important. It's the two things. There's actually a few questions around vocab when it comes to tasting notes and identifying flaws, identifying features in a whiskey. We're going to get a bit nerdy again tonight, and I really appreciate you coming along this ride with me. And it's going to be a bit nerdy talking about some of these things. But I think it's really exciting because it's a chance for us to delve into some of the things to do with whiskey, to do with the production of such, to do with the understanding of such, and working at what is good in whiskey, what is bad, where those benchmarks come from, where those flavors come from. I don't even have a whiskey in front of me at the moment. I knew I was missing something tonight. That's okay. I'll grab one in a moment. But in the meantime, I want to get us started tonight on tonight's stream. Comment there from Joey. Good to see you, mate. Yo, he says. Good to see you, Joey. Thanks so much for joining in. I really appreciate you all joining in with me. Every night I get to do this. And like I said, we're going to be talking about flavor and benchmarks in quality across whiskey. Now, in part 2 tonight, one of the things we have to talk about is, as I say, flaws and vocab. Now, let's start with flaws. I want to start with flaws. Flaws in whiskey are where there are undesirable traits in a whiskey. But just like in the world of whiskey, to be able to know what great whiskey is, I often believe you should have the opportunity in your whiskey journey, if you like, to drink bad whiskey. And there is bad whiskey out there, and I'm not going to name any names or brands, but I've had the opportunity to taste them a long time ago, and sometimes even more recently, which is an opportunity for me to actually go, well, what works and what doesn't in whiskey. Looking forward to this. When I don't like a whiskey, I find myself get stuck with vocab. My bad reviews are literally just no. I like that comment, but you haven't authorized yourself through StreamYard, so I don't know who said that. But I really appreciate that. But it's true though. We're going to work on vocab a bit tonight, a little bit, not too much. But the idea is that we can drill down on certain things here. But just like in whiskey, to know how good whiskey can be, it's good to know how bad it also can be. It's the same in flaws versus features in a whiskey. So some flaws and some features in whiskey, it's good to know what flaws can exist in a whiskey by identifying the bad stuff to the good stuff. So that's really important. So the second thing I want to say about the vocab side of things is that hopefully at the end of this nerdy kind of stream, this half-hour stream, you'll actually learn a bit more about some of the words and some of the phraseology. Oh, it's Irina. Sorry. There you go. Yeah, it just says Facebook user on my screen because of the way this platform works with privacy and all that. But you can authorize yourself through StreamYard if you want, but there's no pressure, no obligation. So I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share some of the nerdy stuff and how to actually, like I said, we're going to start with flaw side of things. and where flaws can be found in whiskey, and how to identify them and how to avoid them, if you like. So this is I'm going to just share my screen. Bear with me here. I'm just going to jump this over here, and I'll go. I hope I can all see that. I'll make it a little bit bigger. So here we have quality control, off notes and flaws as some examples. This is not all of them, but this is some of the more common examples you get. So let's go on the top left here. We've got isovaleric. I mentioned isovaleric last night. Now this is like that musty cheese, sweaty socks, sweaty gym sneakers kind of smell, and it's where cheese gets gassy, if you like. It gets a bit sort of. And that's not, I'm not talking like the good waxy kind of notes. I'm talking bad waxy notes. So that would be things like, those isovaleric sort of notes. Like I was just saying, it's like, it's a musty sneaker of a smell. And that's something that's a flaw in whiskey. And that is one that through training and assessment and time, you'll be able to identify more and more of these kind of flaws. So we'll keep going across here. Then we'll go to butyric. Now, butyric is much more, I think, obvious for some. It's looks like a crying baby with vomit down its front, because that's kind of the smell they're sort of they're mentioning here. And there's a comment here that says musty note and animal is a nice note in whiskey. Well, I like it. Exactly. Well, this is okay. Hold on. Before we go any further, I want to make mention of that, because for some people, a flaw and a feature can be very different. And that is going back to what we were discussing yesterday about genetics, about dietary preferences, and about time of day. So those things actually play into flaws and features, but these are some of the more known actual sort of scientific flaws that you want to avoid in producing a great whiskey. What's the technical term of that delicious Beaumont Ben Nevis funk? Good question. Well, I'm going to get around to that. There's not really a technical term just for that funk, because that's an effort. That's a particular style that's come through their spirit, through means of production, through means of fermentation, which is sort of the whole sort of 56 parts of what it takes to make that spirit. I'm getting that number wrong. It's actually a little bit more than that. But all those different sort of factors that change that spirit character. And a lot of these distilleries often have that character to their spirit, and they don't even fully understand how it's there and how to replicate it. That's the scary part, especially when they want to expand the distillery and they don't want to lose that character. And some distilleries have had that problem. So, but we'll come back to that. Going back to my little my sheet here. So we've got the first one. I said isovaleric. That's that really bad gassy cheese, cheesy gym sock smell. Yeah, whatever it is, mate, never cease. Exactly. Butyric, the crying baby there is baby vomit. Now that's it's a baby vomit aroma that you get off. That's an off note in a whiskey. It's that sort of if you've ever smelled baby vomit, you know what it is. But even adult vomit doesn't matter. But baby vomit is far more butyric. This is much more of that sort of really bad acidic kind of note. Then you've got H2S. Now that's that kind of like rotten egg smell. Can be associated with cask sulfur as well. So that's that rotten egg smell. Really bad rotten egg smell. Acetic, that's next to it there. That's that kind of like, how do I describe it? Acidic. It's kind of like, it's that acidy, almost some soy sauce kind of characteristics to it as well. That can be counted as a flaw there. Then bottom left, we've got musty. Now that's, I think that's looks like a musty toilet roll or something. I'm not sure what that image is, but that's where, yeah. And mustiness can go too far in a spirit. And I actually appreciate sometimes that mustiness in a spirit, because it provides a lot of character to the actual spirit without it being overwhelming. Some older whiskeys have that character. Again, and you're not going to, this is not like one of those things that if you don't pick up on all of these kind of flaws in some whiskeys, then you don't have a great palate. It's not like that at all. Some people don't pick up on these things. Some people pick up on them all. I'm actually envious of those who don't pick up on many of them, because then you get to enjoy whiskeys that other people might just be a bit sort of like, you know, like a later misery whiskey tasting. Yeah, okay. Can I just give you a bunch of whiskeys I don't like and we can play? Is it just me or is my bottle off? Yeah, we can do that, because that's kind of something that really, if you've got, you know what, actually, I'd love to hear more about that kind of thing, because it's like often you'll find whiskeys that you've got in your collection. I know I have that as well. I've got an open bottle or something somewhere that is not to my favor and I don't like it at all. And I'll be like, what's wrong with this whiskey? And a lot of it might be coming down to my sensitivity, genetic sensitivity to that flaw or to that spirit character. A lot of it might come down to something else. So let's move along. Metallic. Now, this one I get quite a bit of in especially you get it a fair bit in some distilleries carry this metallic note quite well, and others don't. If I'm being honest, there's distilleries like Glentockers, Distillery 63, distilleries like 48, Ballamenak. I often get a bit of a metallic note in some of those whiskeys, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually quite favorable. Rotten vegetables is the next one across here. That's not a nice smell. I know that one. You know, you leave some apples and a mango or something in a fruit bowl too long, and you forget about them or whatever, and it's like they get that sort of like it's a rotten vegetable smell. Caprylic is on the end here. That's that sort of musty animal smell. That's like that dog blanket kind of goat poop kind of smell on the end there. Yeah, Cavalan has a sweet copper or stainless steel note is one of the comments here. I'll agree with that. Zeno, that's a good one. It can. I mean, Cavalan can. Certain distillers do have these certain notes, and some of them control it really well, and others don't. So that's something well worth noting here. So here we go. I just want to show you. This is what some of the flaws we could be looking at. And if we're talking about flaws and vocab, these are some of the things you can start saying. You're going to seem like a bit of an expert if you're at a whiskey tasting and someone says, "Oh, there's a bit of a cheesy, sweaty, cheesy note going on in this whiskey." You can say, isovaleric. So you can use that. Your expert guides are right here. No, I wouldn't do that. I mean, it would be a bit sort of almost a little bit, what's the word for it? Over the top, perhaps. So I want to move on to some of the other aspects of whiskey nosing and tasting and appreciation here, and how you're able to identify different flavors at different times and different spikes. And that's why we always recommend taking your time with your dram, because it changes over time in the glass. Your perception changes, your taste changes, and the aromas change in that glass. So let's move on. I'm going to pull this back up to full screen in just a moment. What do we got here? Okay. Not all whiskey tasting is done purely by humans. There has to be an element of science involved here, and that the scientists at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute understand that a lot of what is detected by humans can often be like it's as in like this human. There's plenty of room for human error and substitution and also subjectivity going on. So you often identify some things, and the magic of aroma, the magic of your olfactory senses is that they capture a snapshot of time. They capture a snapshot of memory. Your nose is deeply linked to your brain's memory. And this is something that I love about whiskey. It's that whole sort of the fact that you can nose a whiskey sometimes, and you can have this whiskey that you nose, and it has this really, like, it takes you to another time and place. That for me is super exciting. That's where you get to taste the whiskey. And you go, man, that reminds me of year 5 playground or something, you know what I mean? Or that reminds me of my grandmother's purse. You know what I mean? There's a time and place and a smell and an aroma, that's why your nose and your olfactory senses, which are really important, have a deep connection to your brain and to your memory. And I find that fascinating. That part is endlessly fascinating for me. But going back up on screen here, the gas chromatography olfactometry. There we have a bottle of whiskey, generic bottle of whiskey that goes into the gas chromatograph and comes out, and it is assessed by the detector, and also a nose port, and just like a nose port, pretty self-explanatory what that is. So that's a way for this. This is a machine that's used at the SWRI, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, of which the Society is proudly a member of, and we lean upon their scientific advice and their learnings and what they can teach us, and so we can teach members about this kind of stuff like we're doing right now. But a lot of it is there's a lot of science that goes behind this, so that we can improve what we're bottling overall. So let's have a look at what that detector's picking up. I'll just go one slide down here. Okay, here we go. So we have the gas chromatography here, and we've got the gases that's coming off that spirit, and we've got a retention time and an intensity. Now, this is going to be a little bit sort of like, this will go over heads a little bit, and that's okay. This is a real baseline opportunity for us to talk about. But sometimes you get tobacco notes, waxy notes, sweet toffee notes. They're sort of low sitting in the intensity over time. So that's why, you know, if you smell that waxiness of like a Klein leash sitting here, it's after a short while. These peaks I'll get to in a second, and we'll go to that, and I'll show you the next slide. No, I've lost the slide. How have I lost the slide here? Anyway, that's really annoying. Oh, here it is. It's just got mixed up in the lineup. And here we have an intensity of other active flavors here. So here we have phenylethyl acetate, which is floral notes. We have soapy notes, which is a dip in between. Dodecanote, that's between soapy and floral. That's a non-flavor active. Then I'm gonna dig more into this for you all another time. This is really just sort of like an overview of what this machine can do, is pick up all the notes over time of what those flavors are active, and so it can identify those flaws. So I hope that's at least at the onset a little bit of an interesting way for us to look at how flavor develops, how we can use science now at the SWRI with the SMWS in identifying flavors and identifying flaws, like those butyric flaws, the isovaleric flaws, those kind of things that are non-desirable in a spirit. Now, it depends where it's used and how much of it picks up, of course. Oh, Randy, you're authenticated. Look at that. Just need to convince everyone else to get excited about a yucky bad bottle whiskey night. Yeah, that's a hard one to get a crowd, a group of friends around saying, hey, does everyone want to come around and drink some terrible whiskey? We've all got them, and and that's fine. And sometimes it's not that it's terrible whiskey, is that your palate changes over time. I said this in last night's first part. Over time, your palate changes, and I mean from minute to minute, sometimes from day to day, week to week, year by year, as your palate develops, as you get better at identifying things and appreciating spirit, you actually get better at the whole process of identifying things and actually strengthening your palate. And that's why when I'm properly assessing a whiskey, whether it be on a panel work, whether it be just for fun, I'm able to actually critically assess that whiskey, write tasting notes, and find the flaw. Now let's talk tasting notes. This is vocab. If you open any outturn, you'll see we write a whole lot of tasting notes for a whiskey. Even malt of the month, which is, by the way, outturn's tomorrow. This is not the night before outturn kind of stream, as we usually do. It says here, a superbly fruity aroma jumps out of the glass. Lots of bubblegum, plum eau de vie, cherryade, green apple sorbet, cornbread, golden syrup, etc., etc. So these are the tasting notes of that whiskey. Now that is a collection of tasting notes from the entire tasting panel. That's the important part here. The tasting panel have arranged all these tasting notes, and I've done a session before. You can rewind on our YouTube channel and have a look at my where I talked much more in depth about the tasting panel. I'm going to do a second session on that as well, because we really didn't really even scratch the surface of what they're doing over there at the moment, which is unbelievably exciting. But the flavor aromas that they're picking up, they're writing down, and then they're being put together in a coherent way. So it makes sense to actually taste these things and see where these things can come from. And it says, like, if you're not getting eau de vie, if you're not getting plum puff, if you're not getting golden syrup, that's fine. They're their tasting notes. But I'm going to show you now how to expand your vocabulary. So I'm going to have to screen share again for a moment. Now, I showed this wheel last night, and like I said, I promised to put it up in our Facebook group. I haven't done that just yet. I'm sorry. But I have shown this before. This is the Scotch Whisky Research Institute Flavour Wheel, and you've sort of got the inner circle, middle circle, and outer circle. So this is where I've said before, and I sort of touched on this last night. If someone says to you, oh, that's a sweet, that's got a lovely sweet note. Actually, I'll use a different one. That's got a spicy note. Okay, what kind of spice is it? Oh, it's like a dry spice or it's a peppery spice. That's really important to identify right there. I'm going to zoom in on that one so we can all see it. So this whiskey's got a spicy note. Okay, it's spicy. It's grippy. It's grabbing the edges of my cheeks. What kind of spice is it? Dried spice, clove, cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg. They're just 4 examples, but you could fill that box with 100 different ones. So these are just ones that you can use as a way to start your benchmarking and then even go another level out from there. So you could say it's spicy, cool. It's dried spice, that's level 2. It's nutmeg spice, okay. No, let's say ginger. There's a ginger spice in that whiskey. Oh, that's interesting. Like we had a whiskey recently, 55.57, I think was the code on it, called Digging Up Ginger. Unbelievable ginger note on that whiskey. Where did that come from? It comes from the magic of the spirit and the maturation. So if I was to say, ginger, what kind of ginger? Is it fresh ginger? Is it dried ginger? Is it ginger powder? This is really important to identify that. And some whiskeys you're tasting, you're like, that's like grating fresh ginger into a curry. And that's in that era. So, or you got a whiskey that's nice and oily and fatty. Is it linseed oil, meat fat, greasy, engine oil, chip fat? They're great notes in a whiskey, especially when it's a nice big oily whiskey. I love my big oily whiskey. So let me grab some of these questions coming in here. Tasting note is related to memories or memory recall of a flavor, is it not? Yeah, that's correct. So the tasting notes are memory related, and like I was saying a bit last night, they're memory related, they're genetic, and they're also based on what your dietary history has been on them as well. If someone who regularly enjoys things like fried chicken, and they go, I'm getting a bit of a fried chicken note in that whiskey, they probably know what they're talking about because they know different flavors in fried chicken. Okay, what kind of spice is it? What kind of oil is used? Those kind of notes that you can start talking about and actually stretching out from a bit, which I think is really important. And it's Deanston 12 ginger biscuits. Exactly. There you go. You shouldn't grate fresh ginger into curries. Why not? I like a bit of ginger in it. How else would this is not a cooking show. I use a bit of fresh ginger in my curry, but if you don't, that's fine. I think it adds an element of flavor along with the onion and garlic and all sorts of stuff that goes in there. So, is it a flavor wheel? So it can be used for both nose and palate. Yes, Mark, really good question. Yes. So this is more sort of a flavor wheel, not so much of a nose palate finish kind of element of assessing whiskey. And that's, I think, a really important note here because I'm just going to make myself just a little bit more. There you go. So you can see here, there's things in here like, sour notes. These are generally considered to be non-desirable notes, but, vomit. That's a very satisfying word to say, isn't it? Baby sick, rancid. I'm just going to get rid of that for a second. Yeah, so there's all sorts of things in there that might be undesirable notes, but are worth mentioning. Cheesy notes, as we were saying before, isovaleric notes. Malt vinegar, acidic notes. Those acidic notes are right there. The malt vinegar notes, meaty. Now, this is a little category I want to touch on tonight. So before I go into that, this is something that I was sort of mentioning before about how you can have these are flaws. You can identify flaws, but you can also identify the pros of where those flavor elements can be used appropriately. Let's have a look at this part of the slide just here. No, you need to fry it off with the spices before it becomes a curry. Oh, Irina, you know what? Fine. I think that's what I do anyway. Yes, but I fry it with the onion. There you go. So too bad. So here we've got sulfur. Now, this is a word that people often say in whiskey. Oh, that whiskey's sulfured. I like to be a bit more specific than just saying that. When I taste something like a sherried cask whiskey that might be like a refill sherry butt and it's got sulfur, it's a sulfured cask. I would say that's sort of bordering into those two here: struck match and decaying, gassy, spent fireworks, maybe even tires, rubber tubing, especially. Yes, that's a good one. Maybe some cooked vegetables. That's a pretty flawed whiskey in some ways, but you do find it in some. But then there's sulfur, which is spirit sulfur, which is things like meaty notes, beefy, Bovril, Marmite. I'd even add Vegemite to that. Those sort of meaty, beefy notes that you get in a whiskey can be super desirable. So this is my best tip for you when it comes to expanding your tasting vocabulary. If you taste a whiskey and you go, oh, okay, that's salty. That whiskey's salty. I'd say that about a Lecheg. I'd say that about some young Glen Scotia. There's quite a few whiskeys where I'd use salty as a flavor descriptor. How do you then sort of go one level down from there? Okay, so it's salty. It's sea salt. Here you go. Is it sea salt? Okay. What kind of sea salt? Is it pink sea salt? Okay. Is it things like you could say it's is it salt on a thing? Is it a salt on a food? Is it like salted beef, or is it, it could be anything really. It's like, is it salted eggs? Is it something like that that you're getting? And then connects up with other aspects in the wheel here as well as you go around. And I'll keep going around here. You can see it. Unperfumed soap, fresh fruit. Oh, this whiskey's fruity. Okay, it's what kind of fruit? Is it fresh fruit or is it dried fruit? So is it more sort of apple, pear drops, bananas, tropical notes, or is it dried fruit? Raisins, sultanas, fruitcake, etc. This is really important to actually just to start using a wheel like this to pull through on your tasting notes here. Nick Husick says the meaty note reminds me of a Dreamer's Dram. Nick, I'm glad you like that whiskey. I absolutely bloody love it. It's so Bunnahabhain is a good prime example of salty and springbank as well. There you go. A Dreamer's Dram. My bottle's unfortunately well and truly empty, but it's a 5-year-old and it's an absolute ripper whiskey, that one. It's online at the moment, by the way. I wouldn't miss out on that if you want one, because it's lovely. It's meaty and sweet, and a lovely element of spice to it, and so mature for its age. Bunnahabhain is a prime example, of salty and springbank. Exactly. So you get those salty notes. Sometimes they're part of the spirit character. Sometimes they're unique to that particular cask, which is the magic of the single cask. And one of the reasons I love what the Society does is that every single cask is utterly unique, as is my shameless little plug, all the casks in tomorrow's outturn. If you haven't joined the ballot yet for either of those two vaults collections, you've still got a little bit of time, but the rest of outturn is released tomorrow. You know what? I've got some absolute favorites in here. 10.185 because I love my oily and coastal 10s. Perfect finish to a perfect day. I really like that one as well. But I don't have them in the office at the moment because we're making sure that they're all tucked away from members. 1.219. Lovely. Look, there's so many lovely things in outturn tomorrow. And I really appreciate you all being a part of, like I say, being a part of these live streams and asking some really cool questions, which came through tonight, which was great. So I want to thank you again for all that. In the meantime, I will catch you maybe for a Friday night session tomorrow night. We'll see how we go. Post outturn session. Might be a bit of an earlier one. Not sure yet. We'll announce it on the Facebook page and group and everything, of course, as always. In the meantime, have a great night, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.